I have to say, this is actually the first time I've ever been flown in somewhere to speak. But, no, but in all seriousness, it's very nice to be here for...
I hope you're getting paid well.
Right. My education is a nice kind of...
There's ice cream afterwards.
That's right. That's right. But it's really nice to be here for Thanksgiving, and I never would have guessed that I would be able to speak for my Nana's yahrzeit in Anyo, but it's quite an honor. And so, in any case, I hope she'd be proud. So, I wanted to speak for just a little bit about miracles, with Chanukah time. So I thought, something that, at least my conception about miracles usually, is that, miracles involve some sort of extra effort. Like the status quo is, nature, the natural order of the world. And if there's going to be a miracle, then God has to put some sort of extra effort, extra oomph, do something, pay special attention to make something happen that's outside of nature. But it's interesting, there's a Jewish philosopher from the mid-1900s who brought up a very, I thought, profound idea, which is that actually the difference between, his name's Rabbi Dessler, and he said, really the difference between a miracle and something in nature, there's no difference whatsoever. It's just what you're used to versus what you're not used to. Why could we, make that claim? Really, it's because, think about, the splitting of the sea. We think of that as a huge miracle, right? But who's to say that splitting the sea, once in a lifetime would be any more difficult than keeping it contained and under control for thousands of years? What makes one more of a miracle than the other? Really nothing. Both are just as miraculous. It's just one we're used to and one we're not. So with that, being the case, we still see in our lives, if both are equally easy, let's say, for God, why in our typical lives do we see the natural order much more so than we see miracles? Like, we don't have, one day of a gravity existence and one day where everybody's floating around. So why not? Why not have a miraculous kind of existence where nature changes from day to day? And I think what it comes down to is basically, one is it would be chaotic. We as people wouldn't be able to function if you never knew what each new day would bring. And then the second thing is that God really wanted us to have an element of free choice. If whenever something went wrong, God, swooped in with a miracle like Superman, it would be so obvious we wouldn't have free choice. A big part of our Jewish lives is really looking for God and seeing God in our day-to-day lives. But we do have miracles once in a while. So those are, I guess, that's Chanukah time. And the question is, when we do have miracles, why? Why do we have miracles in those situations when we do? So I think that also comes down to two basic reasons why we might have a miracle. One is because we really need one. If the Jews are so stuck in such a difficult situation that if we don't have a miracle, that's the end of us, that's the end of our people, God's going to do what he can and he's going to help us out with a miracle. And I would say the splitting of the sea is a pretty good example of that. If you have the Egyptians behind us going to kill us and a sea in front of us where we're going to drown, God doesn't split the sea, that's it. That's the end of us. So if we really need to be saved, maybe God doesn't necessarily want to reveal himself to us sometimes, but he has an end goal in mind, and if we need a miracle to help reach that end goal, then he's going to come in and help us out. And then there's a second reason. The second reason is sometimes, even if we don't need to be saved, we sort of need God to give us like a little wave hello. We need to be acknowledged just so that we can get a little bit of like a self-esteem boost. And I would say a good example of this would be the past few Torah portions. We're talking about Joseph. And Joseph, we take the story for granted because we've heard it so many times, but Joseph had unbelievable miracles. He started out, he was sold as a slave to Egypt. He lived in Potiphar's house, this Egyptian official. And from a slave, the Egyptian official saw such, charm in Joseph that he basically promoted him to becoming the head of the household. It says in the Torah that everything was given to Joseph, everything in the entire household except for his own bread. He let him take care of all financial orders in the house, everything that was going on except for Potiphar's own food. For a slave to be in charge of an entire household? What is that? That's unbelievable. That's unheard of. And then he gets thrown in jail, and the same thing happens. He's, at the bottom, the low of the low. He just got kicked out of Potiphar's household for having been with his wife, being accused of doing such things. And that's something that's quite a heinous crime. And now he's put in jail, bottom of the bottom for sure. And it says that the guard of the prison there promotes Joseph to being in charge of all the prisoners. He's suddenly like the guard of the prison. He himself, a prisoner, is the guard of a prison. These are things that are like, we've heard the story, so we don't, necessarily think of it, but we have this guy who's the low of the low suddenly being in charge of all these things. This is an opportunity where God's saying, Joseph, you're going to survive. You're going to survive in Potiphar's house. You're going to survive in jail. But it would be really nice for you, when you're in such a bad situation, to give you a little boost and say, hi, I'm here, I'm with you, I'm gonna help you out along the way. I just thought of this. You might have heard there's like this famous story about this guy, this man, after he dies, he goes to heaven, and he sees his life, and he sees two sets of footprints, and one's his footprints, and one's, God's footprints throughout his life. And then he notices that in the hardest parts of his life, there's only one set of footprints there. So he turns to God and he says, what is this? During the hard parts of my life, you abandoned me? It's just me, myself. You're making me walk on my own through this? That's terrible. And, God says to him, no, you don't understand. Those parts, that's when I carried you. And that's sort of just a nice message. Sometimes when we're in those really bad, difficult situations, we sort of need God to give us a hello, not because we need to necessarily be saved, but we need that opportunity to see God in our lives. So how does this all connect to Chanukah? Okay, so we're gonna take a little detour route to get there, but I want to talk about one more purpose of miracles that I think will help us get there, and that the main thing about miracles, I think, is that it strengthens our faith. When you see something that is obvious to you that God was intervening, you can say it's much more clear to me that God's in this world. But there's actually only 3 times in the entire Torah, where it says that the entire Jewish nation had faith. Only 3 times. Individual people, it'll say like throughout, but for 3 times that the entire Jewish nation had faith. So what were those 3 times? The first time was when God first sent Moses to Egypt. When he first sent Moses to Egypt, so Moses had to show 3 signs to the elders of the Jewish people. And when he showed those 3 signs, and the elders told the Jewish people, you know what, it's true. Someone's coming here God sent someone to bring us out. And at that point, the Jews really felt they had faith. It says that they believed in God, that he had sent someone, and they had renewed faith that they weren't going to be stuck in Egypt forever. So that was the first time. The second time was, in fact, at the splitting of the sea. When all those Egyptians were destroyed, they said to themselves, wow, it's clear as day that God is in this world saving us from these situations. And then the third time was at the giving of the Torah. When God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, there were a lot of miracles that went on there, and Moshe said to them, I'm going to go into the cloud, and you're going to hear God giving the Torah, and then you'll have basically an eternal belief in God because you'll have witnessed this yourself. So those were the 3 times. And there's a rabbi of Prague from the 1500s who said those 3 times each represent 3 things that we need to believe in to have strong Jewish faith. The first time, when Moses came, saying, I'm going to lead you out of here, that was showing what's called hashgacha pratit, that's divine providence. He was able to say, look, God's going to bring you out of, he heard your prayers, your individual prayers, he's showing you these specific miracles. This is a case where, God is individually paying attention to you. It was an instance of divine providence. The second time, at the splitting of the sea, that was a moment that said, there is no other power aside from God. Ein od milvado are the words. There's no other power. Why did that show that? Because the only being that could break nature by splitting the sea is the one who created it. That was basically an ultimate revelation of this is God who's splitting the sea here. So that was the second one. So the first one was divine providence. The second one was that God is really the only ultimate power in this world. And then the third one, at the giving of the Torah, was an awareness, in fact, that God gave the Torah. In order to have a steadfast belief, you have to sort of believe in those 3 principles. And each of those principles also parallel the three major holidays throughout the year. The three major holidays throughout the year, let's say we start with Passover. Okay, so Passover, when we were freed from being slaves in Egypt, that would parallel the fact that God is an ultimate power in our lives. And we see that because also with the plagues, with each of the plagues, he certainly showed a mastery over Egypt, and there's a lot of fascinating parallels how that also showed that he was the creator of the world. Then you have the next holiday is Shavuot. That's the holiday when we celebrate receiving the Torah. And that one too, that parallels the belief that God gave us the Torah. Then the third holiday is Sukkot. And Sukkot, the holiday of the booths, that represents God's divine providence in our lives, because that's about when we were traveling in the desert, God would provide for us. He, gave us food basically falling from the sky. That's the man. Then he gave us, they're called clouds of glory that were there to protect us, and our individual huts. There were all these things where God intervened. And those three holidays, they're called the Shalosh Regalim, the three sort of feet, because each of those messages are sort of like the feet, a tripod that's like the strongest, sort of shape. You need those three sort of legs to be really strong in our Judaism. So that's sort of like the overall framework to have those three elements of faith. But if you carry that one step further, it actually happens that those three principles are paralleled in our rabbinic holidays as well. We have two rabbinic holidays, primarily. One is Purim. On Purim, that's when we were saved by Esther, and that parallels two of those principles. One is that God is an overriding power in our lives. It was unbelievable that he, orchestrated the events so that Esther would be in a position, she was a queen, and I think she was 70 or 80 years old. We always think of her as this young, beautiful princess, but she was really an old woman. The fact that she was chosen to be a queen was really quite surprising, but she was in a position to then help out the Jewish people. And it also says there that the Jews, during the time of that holiday, when they realized what a miracle had happened to them, they sort of re-accepted the Torah on their own account. But then there's our third principle, right? That's the principle of divine providence. So which holiday is that reflected in? That's Chanukah. Chanukah is the holiday, I guess I would say, of divine providence. Why is that? So Chanukah, we have basically two miracles. Our two miracles, one that we talk about less, is the miracle of the war. The war, you had the Maccabees, who were these, Jews who were trying to fight off the Greeks. We also always view them as these big warriors, but they were really, Jews who had been studying for most of their lives. They couldn't have been very strong, and we say that, God gave over the strong people in the hands of the weak. They weren't so strong. That was a huge miracle, that this big Greek army fell victim to this small Jewish army. And then there's the second miracle, the miracle of the oil of the menorah, supposed to last for 1 day and lasted for 8 days. Very good, yeah. So why did we need two? The first one, where they won the war, that's pretty clear. If they didn't win the war, we sort of needed that to happen, otherwise we wouldn't exist. That's the same issue of, sometimes you need a miracle so that you can be saved. But why did we need the one of the oil? That's where it gets a little bit trickier. What would have happened if we didn't have the oil? Not a whole lot, really. There wouldn't have been so much to go wrong. Of course, it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to light the menorah in the temple. But it would have been 1 week later. If we're missing a lulav or an etrog, do we say, God, please give me a miracle that a lulav and an etrog are going to appear on the spot so I can fulfill that mitzvah? No, of course not. So it's going to be 1 week later that they light the menorah. What's the big deal? It wouldn't have been really such a big deal. But the reason why it was a big deal is because God did it anyway, and that was kind of a gift. That was, not all the Jews were fighting the battle against the Greeks. There were plenty of Jews who said, we like Greek culture, it's fine. We'll happily, integrate ourselves into the Greek culture, and that's fine and wonderful, and we're good. So when the Jewish sector that did fight the war and won succeeded, you had a bunch of Jews who were very confused, essentially, who basically said to themselves, we have this Jewish group who fought this war. We weren't with them fighting this war. It seemed miraculous. We don't know. What is God thinking in this situation? They needed an explicit miracle, one that was, beyond nature, to clarify to them, this is something from God, both the miracle of the war and also the miracle of the oil. It was to help those Jews interpret what had just happened. It was sort of this extra gift from God telling them, let me show you, that I'm here, that I'm this presence. It was that extra wave peeking out behind the curtain as basically a gift. So the other question I want to address then is why was that outright miracle, that very obvious miracle of the oil, why was it a miracle with the menorah in particular? God can do a lot of open miracles. Throughout our history we have, let's say, the splitting of the sea, or even, let's say, the 10 plagues. The 10 plagues, there were a lot of miracles there, and it may not be clear which ones for what reason. So here we have a miracle specifically with the menorah, and the question is, why is that? So the main thing about the menorah is that it provides light. And if you look at the holiday of Chanukah, there's a big focus on light and on seeing. The whole mitzvah of lighting the menorah so that people will see it. You can only light a menorah if there are people around to see it. Also, we say, Ein lanu reshut lishtamesh b'hem elo lirotam bilvad. We're not allowed to use the light of the menorah. You have to have a shamash to provide extra light, or another light on in the room. You're not only allowed, you can't just use the light of the menorah, you're only allowed to see it. Or there's also, you say a bracha when you see the lights from the menorah. There's a big focus on sight. So basically, there are two types of sight. One is, I can see because it's a clear sunny day outside. And then there's the second kind of sight, which you may have heard my mom say pretty often. If you tell her something and she'll say, I see. What kind of I see is that? As I see, meaning I understand. It's a sight that connects to wisdom. And that's really the sight that we're looking at and is represented by the menorah. Every enemy against us, we sort of compare to something. And on all enemies we say is I guess it's a dark time. But Greeks in particular, even though they were knowledgeable, they had a lot of intellect, they brought in a lot of academia, no question, but their I guess attack against us in particular was called darkness, that they darkened the eyes of the Jews. And what did they do? What did they do that darkened our eyes? It says that the Greeks gave a command that the Jews had to engrave on the horns of their oxen, and engrave on them and say, Ein lanu chalek b'Elokei Yisrael, which means we don't have a portion in the God of Israel. That's what the Jews were commanded to engrave on the horns of their oxen. The question is, okay, so the Greeks, they had this goal to eradicate the Judaism from our lives, fine, but what is this about engraving it on the oxen? And the main point there is, what did they use oxen for? Oxen was for their agriculture. It was for their day-to-day lives. It was when they were going outside, to the marketplace or to the field and working with those oxen. When the Greeks had them engrave on the oxen, we don't have a part in the God of Israel, they were trying to create a disconnect. They said, you may be doing Jewish things at home, but we're going to make a disconnect where you're not doing that out in the field. If we can purposefully and successfully cut that off, then we know you'll be in trouble. And that kind of darkness is very, very confusing. If you're doing one thing at home, but the rest of the day you're doing something else, then slowly but surely, most of your day is out of the house, not inside of the house. Things are going to seep in rather than seeping out. So the way that we had to counteract that was essentially with the menorah. The menorah, the light of the menorah, also represents wisdom. And it says that if you misha harotzah, harotzah shiachkim yadrim. Someone who wants to gain wisdom, when they pray, they should turn a little bit to the south. Why? Because the menorah was positioned in the temple in the south. And the menorah, it represented wisdom, because if you picture a menorah, it has 7 branches. And with the middle, post with the middle branch. So that comparison there was actually that each branch represents a different kind of wisdom. Think of the 7 intelligences concepts. I don't remember exactly what they are, but things like mathematics or music or art, and each branch represents a different, very cultured element, much like you could almost say in Greece. But the middle post of the menorah was representative of Torah, and each of those lights, while they're very much a part of the menorah, are turning face inwards towards that middle branch. So the menorah, while it represents this wisdom, and all of those types of wisdom are there and prevalent and important, it's integrated together with Torah. You can't make the division that the Greeks are trying to do of separating them. And with that sort of integrated approach and that integrated wisdom and being able to see that big picture, that's really how we could counteract the Greeks. And you can see the laws of Chanukah is to take our menorah and put it in our doorway. And our doorway is exactly that bridge. I mean, we don't do it now because we don't have, I guess, the proper doorways, or it'd be too windy or whatever it is. But to put the menorah in the doorway, that's basically saying it's the bridge. It's the gap. It's the connection between the outside and the inside. It's connecting both parts of your life, to make it one. And seeing really the holiness in your day-to-day life just as much as your life at home or your life on Shabbat, or the times when we feel specifically Jewishly connected, you can feel in your day-to-day life normal existence as well. So one of the laws of lighting the menorah is, you're supposed to light at night once it's dark out, once the sun has set, and you can keep lighting until the point where no one is walking in the marketplace anymore. It says, Ad shetichaleh haregel min hashuk, when the people's feet have left the marketplace. But that word haregel, the feet of the people have left the marketplace, you can also read the word as hergel. Hergel means habit, things that you're used to. So the concept is to light the menorah until you've eradicated hergel, habit, getting used to things from the marketplace. That means instead, what should you do? Go to the marketplace and don't see it as habit, see it as miraculous. Keep lighting the menorah, the Chanukah candles, till you really internalize that thought of everything that's happening in my life is particularly miraculous. So the thought that I want to close with is just really an example of, I think, something in our day-to-day life that we really can view as miraculous, even though it's something that's very day-to-day. And I think I wanted to pick something that would, connect to Nana. So I chose things really revolving around food. Nana had a lot of gratitude for food. Like we would, if we would eat something, there was a big concept of, take what you want, but eat what you take. And, you should really finish what's on your plate because you should be grateful for the gift that is food. And should be known for, saying at the end of a meal, this was delicious. That was just being really appreciative for whatever was made. And then also a big thing, for Nana and Grandpa is Birkat HaMazon. I was very well trained in the Sephardic Birkat HaMazon. I even remember, I think we used to listen to tapes to learn it. Is that right, Grandpa? I remember we listened to, I think maybe it was Yaakov Mimos on the tape, but I remember we listened to tapes of that, and once we learned it, that was like very, very exciting. So I thought, Birkat HaMazon is one of those opportunities where when you eat, that is about as mundane as you get. But when you see Birkat HaMazon, suddenly, you would say, what's the point of Birkat HaMazon? To show gratitude. But it's interesting, if you really actually look at the text of Birkat HaMazon, there's very little that actually has to do with thanking God for food. The big, I guess, different parts of Birkat HaMazon are about recognizing, thanking God for the land of Israel, or praying that the temple be rebuilt. There's all these other aspects that don't seem to really connect to food. Why are we bringing all these spiritual things into our, grace after meals? It doesn't seem to make sense. But I heard this really nice idea from, her name's Miss Chevy Garfinkel. She's an educator in New York. And she said, what is it, when you eat, before you had your meal, you were really hungry. Like sometimes when you're really hungry, you just can't think about anything else. They say, I know if you're irritable, you should check if you're hungry, if you're tired, and like there's one other thing that I can never remember. But in any case, when you're hungry, you really feel a lack. And then what happens? You eat your meal, and it's as if you were never hungry. You completely forget that what you were missing and craving before, it's completely fulfilled, completely satiated that need. So Birkat HaMazon is saying, you had this experience of really missing something and then fulfilling it. Let's translate that into what that means in other spiritual realms. So let's say the rebuilding of the temple. We don't know what it means to have a temple. We just have no clue. We've never lived with one. We don't know what that existence would be like at all. So what do we say? Just compare it to food. Right now, you're lacking something. You may not realize it, but it's like that hunger pain. And you know what? When you get it, you're going to get this unbelievable, satiated feeling that you just almost never even would have felt like it was lacking because now it's so fulfilled. You so fulfilled that need. So it's taking this sort of physical feeling, physical emotion of eating food and translating it into very spiritual applications of trying to apply that feeling. So I think part of the goal, I guess, of Chanukah is, can we find a way, I guess, to take those physical things and not just be satisfied. Satisfied in Hebrew is saveya. Saveya is the same letters as shava, the number 7. Number 7 is considered like a number for this world. You know, everything in this world is in the realm of nature. That's like the number 7. But what's the number 8? Number 8 is Shmona. That means miraculous. That's Chanukah. You know, Chanukah, they say, we were just talking about how on Chanukah, we really should only have 7 days of a holiday, right? Only 7 days were miraculous. There was 1 day's worth of oil. That 1 day worth of oil wasn't a miracle. If we're celebrating the miracle, celebrate 7 days. Why should you ever celebrate that 8th day? Well, because through realizing those 7 miraculous days, you'll be able to look back at that first day that was completely natural, that 1 day of oil building, and say, oh, that was also miraculous. That's just as great a miracle, the things that are natural. So the number 8 it really represents the things that are above nature, and the word for that is Shmona. Shmona is 8. Hidden in that word is, opposed to 7, which is Sheva, Saveya, satisfied, Shmona is Shamen, which literally means fat, or basically, you know, an excess of blessings. So the goal is really that, you know, through having this mentality, we'll have an excess of blessings and really be able to see the miraculous in our day-to-day lives.